Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the installation of the Roland R. Griffiths Ph.D. Professorship in Psychedelic Research on Secular Spirituality and Well-Being. My name is Jimmy Potash. I'm the Henry Phipps Professor and the Director of the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences. It's great to see all of you here today. And it's a privilege to welcome Ron Daniels, the President of Johns Hopkins University, and Ted DeWeese, the Interim Dean of the Medical Faculty and CEO of Johns Hopkins Medicine. I'm extremely happy to welcome Dr. Roland Griffiths, who made this professorship possible, and his wife, Marla Weiner. I'm also pleased to extend a warm welcome to the inaugural recipient of the professorship, Dr. David Yaden, and his wife, Dr. Yaden. It's great to have family members and friends and colleagues and charitable supporters of Dr. Griffiths and Dr. Yaden here to share in this special day with us. And special hello to our charitable supporters and family members watching online. Welcome to you all. I'm going to turn the program over to the Interim Dean of the Medical Faculty and CEO of Johns Hopkins Medicine, Dr. Ted DeWeese, to present the Griffiths Professorship in Psychedelic Research on Secular Spirituality and Well-Being. Ted.
Jimmy, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Hey, thank you so much. I appreciate that. It's a delight to have everyone here, and it's really a delight for me to be here, Roland in particular, to celebrate the dedication of the Roland R. Griffiths Ph.D., a professorship, and I have to read this, Roland, in psychedelic research on secular spirituality and well-being, and of course congratulate its most worthy inaugural recipient, Dr. David Yaden. David, congratulations. And on behalf of the entire School of Medicine, Roland, and really the many other, I think maybe 100 other donors who've helped support this professorship, I really want to thank for the outstanding commitment that you have had and they have all had to Johns Hopkins, to the School of Medicine, and in particular to the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences. Really wonderful, thank you. For those of you who don't know, Roland has been at Johns Hopkins for more than 50 years. 50 years, Roland. That's amazing. And he has done, really his primary research focus has been around behavioral and subjective effects of mood-altering agents. All of us know that Roland is truly, I don't know, if you may be the international expert, Roland, certainly one of the most important international experts in his field. He's authored more than 425 scientific articles, trained more than 60 postdoctoral fellows, and certainly made arguably the most significant understanding and contributions in a wide range of psychedelic drugs, particularly those focused on psychedelics like psilocybin. In 1999, after Roland undertook regular meditation practice, he initiated the first study in decades to evaluate the effects of a high dose of classic psychedelic drug. That research showed that when it was administered to carefully screened and psychologically supported patients, the drug psilocybin produced substantial and sustained positive changes in mood, attitudes, and behavior. And then that really culminated in that really important paper in 2006. That study, along with a series of other studies that Roland and his colleagues produced around psilocybin and other psychedelics, those is widely credited for the contemporary reemergence in the scientific and cultural interest in psychedelic compounds, where we sort of find ourselves today. In 2019, Dr. Griffiths established the Johns Hopkins Center on Psychedelic and Consciousness Research, which is deeply engaged in developing new approaches to the treatment of a wide range of psychiatric conditions. And at the same time, Dr. Griffiths has been keenly interested in following up on his previous studies of transformative experiences in healthy participants, which include beginning and experienced long-term meditators as well as religious leaders. It is that keen interest coupled with Dr. Griffiths' recent cancer diagnosis that led him to really spur on the development of this professorship and its accompanying research. The School of Medicine, Roland, is extremely grateful to you for all you've done for your more than 50 years here, certainly for the exemplary career you have led, the research you have put forward, and the model that you have established in putting forward the kind of scientific discovery, research, and support of colleagues and trainees that land us here today. So Roland, thank you for that vision and that experience, really very important. Dr. Yaden is the first recipient, as I've noted, and he has an extensive background in psychology. As an undergraduate, he studied psychology, philosophy, and a number of religious studies. And during that time, because they're all melded, he, of course, underwent Marine Corps Officer Candidate School, because it takes a lot of psychology to do that. Then once you finish that, of course, because of that experience, you have to do some Zen meditation, which he's studied, and of course, culminating in his graduating from Rutgers with high honors in psychology, magna cum laude. He earned 2 master's degrees and a Ph.D. in psychology at the University of Pennsylvania, and then came to Hopkins as a postdoctoral fellow with Roland back in 2020. And I think everyone has said just you've been spectacular in your time here with Hopkins, David. David's recently published a book titled The Varieties of Spiritual Experiences, 21st Century Research and Perspectives. This book reviews historical and contemporary scientific research and provides a counterbalance to the prevalent views that such experiences are necessarily symptoms of mental illness. And speaking for me, I appreciate that. David, the School of Medicine is very pleased to recognize you as the inaugural Griffiths Professor. Congratulations again on that, David. So with that, because endowments of all sorts, and particularly professorships, are held and administered by the university, we formally present them to the university. And so with that, I'd like to invite our president, Ron Daniels, to the podium. And Ron, as Dean of the Medical School, I formally present to you, as President of the University, the Roland R. Griffiths Ph.D. Professorship in Psychedelic Research on Secular Spirituality and Well-Being. Congratulations.
Thanks, Ted. Well, thank you, Ted, and without further ado, I gratefully, enthusiastically accept this professorship. From 1901 to 1902, William James, the father of American psychology, delivered the famed series of Gifford lectures on the varieties of religious experience, forever altering how scholars regarded these ineffable, transcendent encounters with what James called the unseen. The impact of that tectonic shift can still be felt today in the work of Dr. David Yaden, whose latest book is in direct conversation with James, and I hope will indulge me the opportunity as a complete novice to say a few words about James. Now, in his 2 lectures, James draws a key distinction between 2 types of individuals, the once born and the twice born. So far, so good? The once born are those who walk through the world imbued with an inherent optimism and lightness, a conviction that basically all is well. I'm assuming there are relatively few of those here today, given that PhD and MD programs do a pretty good job of weeding out the inveterate optimist, so I think we're safe in now turning to the twice born. The twice born, by contrast, are those deeply acquainted with suffering, pain, and emptiness, who have emerged from their dark nights of the soul with a sense of meaning and purpose. James experienced episodes, as you know, of debilitating depression and the devastating losses throughout his life, and his sympathies lay firmly with the twice born. He also understood that for many sufferers, deliverance from despair, in whatever form it took, could sometimes only come from powerful and transformational spiritual experiences. Now, this insight helped occasion a sea change in the academy that rippled across disciplines and fields, influencing thinkers from psychoanalyst Carl Jung to Canadian philosopher Charles Taylor. You knew I had to get the latter in there. But it would take another sea change in science, indeed, and scholarship for researchers to begin exploring not only the contours of transformative spiritual experiences, but the possibilities of inducing them in scientific settings and assessing their therapeutic potential. And few have truly been as central to that endeavor as has Dr. Roland Griffiths. As Roland would be first to say, this wasn't always the plan. Indeed, if you'll permit me a little poetic license, Roland is, in the parlance of James, a twice-born academic. In the mid-1990s, as Ted mentioned a moment ago, Roland was an internationally renowned scientist responsible for numerous path-breaking psychopharmacological studies on substances ranging from caffeine to hypnotic sedatives. And around that time, as you heard, Roland also began meditating, like seriously meditating. He went far beyond popping a meditation for beginners tape into the VCR. Recall, this was the 1990s after all. He was meditating for multiple hours a day, attending retreats, joining a Siddha yoga community, and exploring the depths of his own consciousness. In time, as you know, this practice led Roland to powerful, indescribable experiences. And even though meditation had virtually nothing to do at that point with his academic career, he started to wonder whether similar experiences to the ones he was having could be studied in others, and even more important, whether they could be induced to help people lead lives of greater meaning, purpose, and serenity. And as he pursued these questions, he eventually, of course, landed on psilocybin. Now, this was, as I've talked in another context, clearly a fraught decision. Psilocybin was illegal and had been for decades, and even to suggest that this was a legitimate object of serious research and inquiry risked skepticism, if not professional ridicule. But Roland was, as you know, undeterred. His belief in the potential value of the substance to human flourishing was worth Snickers conferences, or even, as he put it, the risk of career suicide. In the truest tradition of the academy, he had to follow these instincts to their logical end. And as Roland observed, the magic of Hopkins was truly felt then in the support that the institution, particularly IRB at the time, lent to this endeavor. And the results, of course, have been staggering. Roland, as you and your colleagues have shown, psilocybin to have powerful therapeutic effects on a range of conditions, sometimes even after just a single treatment, from addiction to severe depression to debilitating anxiety for patients facing life-threatening cancer diagnoses. You have helped open up promising new avenues to help others overcome their darkest and their most tumultuous moments of suffering, to be, as James said, twice born. And scholars and practitioners around the world have taken note, as evidenced by the vast network of support for this extraordinary professorship. You embody, as I've said before, the truest and highest ideals of scientific endeavor in the academy, and our world, our institution, is so much better for it. And today is a culmination of your stunning second act. And although William James never conceptualized the idea of being thrice born, I'm thrilled that Roland's legacy will continue in perpetuity, starting with the work of today's recipient, Dr. David Yaden. A devout student of William James, as well as Roland Griffiths, Dr. Yaden is committed to continuing to demonstrate that transformative spiritual experience ought not to exist beyond the bounds of scientific study. In a host of articles and books, Dr. Yaden explored the complex neuropsychological and psychological processes, neurophysiological and psychological processes behind transcendent encounters. And this has included measuring the subjective effects of such moments, whether by developing an awe experience scale or quantifying the lasting effects of psychedelic experiences. Starting from his days as Roland's postdoc, Dr. Yaden has helped shepherd some of the most path-breaking research at the Center for Psychedelic and Conscious Research in Palliative Care and Mood and Substance Disorders. And he is just as committed to advocating for the appropriate guardrails to ensure the field's longevity and value. Dr. Yaden, your research is elucidating the complexities of consciousness and the varieties of spiritual experience in profound and productive ways that will mean so much to so many, and we're so proud to have this work being done here at Johns Hopkins. And to Roland, as an institution committed to the scientific method, our purchase at Hopkins lies in entrusting our faculty to follow their core convictions and cut new grooves in scientific wisdom, even and especially when they run counter to prevailing opinion to receive wisdom. Thank you for your extraordinary courage, for your vision, and for your enduring contributions to our university and to the broader world. We're so in your debt.
Okay. Got to flip through a few pages. So, thank you so much, President Daniels. I'm going to continue the two lives theme that you introduced. At another recent event on the Homewood campus, hosted by President Daniels, I listened while a speaker quoted a strikingly wise maxim from Confucius, which was, "We all have two lives." The second begins when we realize we only have one. And I thought immediately of Roland, whose second life began when he was diagnosed with metastatic colon cancer early in 2022. As tragic as that seemed, Roland somehow quickly began to feel that his second life was better than his first, that each moment had begun to feel more precious than ever before. He described a newfound joy and a more profound depth of connection to people in the world. And all of this was extremely moving to me. And it became an inspiration to countless others when he began to speak about it publicly. Perhaps most notably in an April interview in the New York Times Magazine. Many readers reacted powerfully, with one writing, "Dr. Griffiths is a national treasure." That he's also a beautiful human being really shines through in this interview. One of the readers who found that New York Times piece compelling was Oprah Winfrey, who subsequently interviewed him in front of a live audience. It was released last week on Oprah Daily. And of course, it doesn't get any bigger than Oprah. That's available. It's all available to everybody online right now. Roland has always been an intensely driven person, determined to accomplish important goals. And he told me, when he got ill, that his illness was going to force him to cut back from working 70 to 80 hours a week to a mere 40. I'm a little bit skeptical about whether that's actually happened, because he's continued to be quite ambitious. And he's been especially determined to see that the work on an element of psychedelic research that felt most weighty to him and significant to him would continue in perpetuity. And that is work on the power of psychedelics to enhance spirituality and well-being. And this is the kind of work that might allow people to begin their second lives far earlier, long before they learn they have a terminal illness. He felt that the establishment of a Roland Griffiths Professorship in Secular Spirituality and Well-Being would ensure that resources would be in place for the long haul to move this work forward. And it's a testament to the enormously high esteem in which Roland is held throughout the field of psychedelic research and the world of proponents of psychedelic exploration that the gifts in his honor have poured in. In fact, they've come from a remarkable 665 donors, to all of whom I'm extremely grateful. They include Carrie and Claudia Turnbull, who were instrumental in launching the professorship and are here with us today. Thank you so much, Carrie and Claudia. Other donors who are here include Neil and Jocelyn Johnston and Jack and Lucy Henningfield. Thank you for your support. I also want to give a huge thanks to the university, which committed a remarkable $5 million in Hopkins funds to bolster this effort, in an enormous vote of confidence in the value of this work. Roland launched the psychedelic renaissance with the groundbreaking 2006 paper that Dean DeWeese referred to, and he created the first psychedelic center in 2019. And with the establishment of this professorship, he's helping to ensure that Hopkins will continue to lead in this fascinating area that has so much potential to enrich lives and promote human flourishing. The poet Mary Oliver, realizing we only have one life, famously wrote, "Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life?" I have nothing but affection and the utmost admiration for you, Roland, and I'm so grateful to you for creating this professorship. I'm so pleased to confer my departmental blessing on it. What you have done with your one wild and precious life is really nothing less than astonishing in its impact and profundity. It's now my pleasure to invite Dr. Griffiths to the podium.
So thank you, Dean DeWeese, President Daniels, Jimmy, for your very kind comments, and Jimmy, for your just continuing support of the psychedelic work at Johns Hopkins. So the purpose of this endowment is to support a professorship and establish what we expect to be a world-class, rigorous, empirical program of research with psychedelic substances to advance our understanding of well-being, spirituality in service of human flourishing. And this is done in generations to come. It's in perpetuity. The hallmark of the endowment is the scientific method. So my inspiration, as Jimmy has mentioned, for wanting to establish the endowment came directly out of after a totally unexpected diagnosis about a year and a half ago. And it was prompted by revising my estate plan to look at charitable contributions. And at the time, I thought really deeply, what is it that I really would like to contribute? And that was that there's something incredibly important about the very nature of these transformative experiences. I'm going to just back up for a second just to tell you a little bit about the occasion of the diagnosis, which has come to be for my wife Marla and myself taken as really a gift, a blessing, unexpectedly. And it really gave rise in both of us to this sense of gratitude for the preciousness of life. And as a consequence of that, what's unfolded for us is this greater sense of peace, joy, love, well-being than we had ever before expected and experienced. But where did I find myself immediately after the diagnosis? I mean, this is the psychologist in me, I guess. Well, initially in out-and-out disbelief, and then very rapidly running through the range of emotions at offer with such an occasion, such as fear, depression, anxiety, resentment, denial. all of which seemed actually to be out and out misery and incredibly unwise states to inhabit would one be able to do otherwise. And also I have to say that just given my scientific and skeptical inclinations, the option for turning to supernatural beliefs was not available. So for myself, what I came to recognize actually very quickly, within a couple of weeks of the diagnosis, was that what I had learned from meditation over some decades of practice and what I knew from research and experience with psychedelics is that we need not identify with emotions as they arise, but instead we can turn with interest to investigate the very present moment, this moment that we're in right now, and cultivate gratitude for the astonishing mystery in which we find ourselves. It's really a mystery. Consider the human predicament just from the perspective of our current best scientific understanding. So where are we? We find ourselves here as these highly evolved sentient creatures. We have the ability to see, touch, taste, smell, and we've developed these remarkable technologies such as language and mathematics and the scientific method to gain some purchase on what we think the very nature of reality is. But deeply mysterious and incredibly interesting to me is that we have this capacity to be aware that we're aware, this self-reflective awareness. And if you think about it, it's actually the only thing we know for certain. And we can only know that about ourselves. We can't know that about others, that we're conscious. And yet, we're deeply ignorant about what's going on here. So scientifically, we don't understand consciousness at all. It's a very deep and hard problem. And we certainly don't understand how this project started nor where it's going. So shortly after discovering gratitude as a viable off-ramp to misery, I began contemplating the charitable contribution part of my estate plan. And that's where I started contemplating deeply what it is that I wanted to give. And that married very quickly with this sense that I have personally, and I suspect we all fundamentally feel, and that is what we want is humankind to awake with gratitude to the preciousness of life. We need to take care of one another. And this reflects our awareness, our consciousness. Now, as a scientist, I have a strong bias, admittedly, to believing that rigorous empirical research is our best shot at understanding the very nature of reality. We know from research and experience with psychedelics that they can occasion at very high probability these transformative kinds of experiences with deep meaning and spiritual significance. These experiences turn out to be strikingly similar to naturally occurring such experiences and characterized, at least as I currently formulate it, by at least three principal components. There's this deep sense of connectedness that we have, that we're all in this together, that there's some unifying sense to what's going on here. And this is accompanied by a sense of preciousness, sacredness, if you want to use a religious term, precious beyond belief. And thirdly, although we can't know it to be true, there's this sense that these experiences are more real and more true than everyday waking consciousness. There's an authoritative value to them. We also know, based on research and observation now, that such experiences can produce enduring positive changes in pro-social and ethical attitudes and behavior. You know, so then the scientific question is, okay, what's going on here? Well, we don't know, but it seems to me that it's really interesting and important scientific question to address. And it has profound ethical implications. And in fact, it's the very bullseye of the endowment project. I think there's something about such experiences that relate intimately to the very nature of human consciousness, the nature of what it's like to be human. Reflect on the mysterious truth that if you turn your attention inward, with or without psychedelics, you can become aware that you're aware. And sometimes when you do so, this profound inner knowing arises. And it's something we can only access individually. It feels core to our humanity. And we do recognize, in fact, these three principles. We're all in this together. There's something precious about this, and it feels authentically true. So I would submit that we all have the opportunity to wake up with a sense of freedom, peace, joy, and gratitude. But sadly, many of our fellow Homo sapiens simply find that to be unimaginable. Now, accompanying this urge toward compassion and mutual caretaking strike me as foundational to the very basic and foundational ethical principles that I think there's pretty good consensual agreement on. And it really boils down to do unto others as you would have them do unto you. So rigorous perspective, empirical research with psychedelics and psychedelic-like interventions represent a uniquely powerful scientific tool for understanding the very nature and impact of these awakening experiences. So this is straight-on science, empirical science, perspective science, looking deeply into the mystery of consciousness. Furthermore, it's my increasingly sad impression that our rapidly growing technologically spawned threats, such as nuclear, bioweapons, AI risk, et cetera, I've come to believe that such research is not only important, it may ultimately be critically crucial to the very survival of our species. We're in an arms race here to understanding what the nature of these pro-social effects are. The research is also absolutely unique at present because there's no funding for this research from federal funds or outside of the philanthropic center. So today, I'm just incredibly pleased to report, as Jimmy has said, that we met our, we've now exceeded $20 million of research support, almost 700 donors. And I'm deeply touched that Johns Hopkins, as a university, made a commitment to this project. And I've spent my entire career here, so I have a fond affection for the university, but that's incredibly meaning to me. So these funds will be managed by Johns Hopkins as an endowment, and they're going to generate annual income to support the professorship and this world-class research program focused on spirituality and well-being. Now, as I already mentioned, my recent life circumstances have made cultivation and expression of gratitude a primary life practice for me. So in addition to acknowledging the many individual donors. I want to, in particular, acknowledge my dear friends, Carrie and Claudia Turnbull, who actually made the first donation to the endowment and then took a leadership role in helping fund the endowment. And to some of our very significant donors, my good friend now, Tim Ferriss, Alexander Cohen, Antonio Gracias, Genevieve and Steve Jurvetson, Blake Makowski. And then I need to call out Mike DeVito, wherever he is, a star in the Department of Development, and for everything that he's done to make this come to be. And I don't believe Bernard Justice made it over. He's in legal at the medical school. But he and my very good friend, Rick Langer, worked incredibly hard to develop the technical endowment details that guarantees the integrity of the endowment be maintained over time in perpetuity. I would call out my good close friend Bob Jesse, a Hopkins alum who remembers spending many hours as an undergraduate up in the glass pavilion right here. And then I want to call out David himself. So whether he recognizes it or not, David was really part of my inspiration for creating an endowment of this magnitude. David is simply an outstanding scientist, scholar, and collaborator. I don't know of anyone worldwide, I mean that, who's better suited to be first recipient and take a leadership role in this project. And then finally, I need to express my deepest gratitude to my wife, Marla, for her incredible loving support of me, this audacious endowment project, and our joint enlivening adventure in celebrating the preciousness of life, an invitation that I now want to extend to each of you here and online individually. Please join us in celebrating life. It's so precious. Thank you.
Wow. That was so beautiful and so moving. Thank you, Roland. Certainly it makes clear how fortunate we are to have you as a part of this great institution. Certainly I feel that having you part of this great department has been a real honor. I'm going to move on now to talk about the founding honoree of the professorship, and who, as we've heard, is quite a spectacular person. Hanging on the wall in my office is a famous painting by the Belgian surrealist René Magritte. It's a painting of a very large pipe. Many of you have probably seen that painting. The kind of pipe that you smoke has the caption, "Ceci n'est pas une pipe," French for "this is not a pipe." And the idea that things are not necessarily what they appear to be, or that people are not necessarily who they appear to be, is kind of a first principle of psychiatry. Last April, when Roland proposed David Yaden as the inaugural recipient of the Griffiths Professorship. Then Provost of Johns Hopkins University, Sunil Kumar, expressed some concern. He was a little worried about this. He was worried about the idea of giving a professorship that was proposed to be unusually large at $10 million to a junior assistant professor. In fact, David, at that point, he'd been an assistant professor for all of 35 days. Doesn't get a lot more junior than that. It didn't appear to make a whole lot of sense, and when I first heard about this, it was sort of newly sprung on me, and it didn't seem to make that much sense to me. But I took a close look at David's CV, and at that point, he'd written 55 papers and book chapters. He'd edited 3 books. He'd authored a book that had received a major review in the Washington Post. And his papers included papers on the development of the all-experience scale, on linguistic analysis of mystical experience, on the noetic quality, that is what Roland was mentioning, a sense of having an insight that seems to penetrate into deep truths. And I thought, okay, this is a guy who's clearly accomplished quite a lot. But then I also knew, as Roland was just telling us, that he thought extremely highly of David and praised his work ethic and his dependability and his productivity. And I knew that Roland is someone with very, very high standards, and someone whose opinion is quite measured and quite judicious. And I thought, and then he thought, as he just told us, that David was already at a point where he was a leader in this young field of spirituality and well-being in relation to psychedelics. So I decided, well, I'd better meet with David, take the measure of him for myself. And I did, and I was quite impressed. I thought he had tremendous maturity, maturity of demeanor and maturity of vision. As President Daniels was describing, he wanted to build on this magnificent work of Harvard philosopher and psychologist William James. He wanted to build on what he had done in his book, The Varieties of Religious Experience, subject these types of experiences to the experimental method, better characterize them, ultimately, with the ultimate goal of potentially harnessing them for therapeutic purposes. And I felt like I'd rarely met someone at this stage of his career who had such a focused sense of where he was headed. So I communicated all of that to Provost Kumar, and he was indeed persuaded that Dr. Yaden was just the right person for this important role. Interestingly, Provost Kumar's incisive judgment has since landed him the prestigious role of president of Tufts. He's a guy who makes good judgments. So, since that time, a little more than a year ago, my confidence in David has only grown. We had a delightful dinner together at the American Psychiatric Association meeting in New Orleans, where I realized the depth of his intellectual and historical grounding in our field. He told me about his fascination with the impact of William James on the thinking of our department's founder, Adolph Meyer. James's pragmatism influenced Adolph Meyer's common sense approach to psychiatry, which eschewed monolithic views of the nature of mental disorders in favor of a more sensible, pluralistic approach. Later, David spent an evening at our house for a book club that included a Psychedelic Center acting director, Fred Barrett, who's here today, and center supporter, Judy Shee, who's also here. He talked quite compellingly about his wonderful new book that we've heard about, released last fall, The Varieties of Spiritual Experience, which picks up where James' book left off, reviews the systematic evidence for its claims and discusses the ways in which psychedelics can elicit these experiences, and talks potentially about long-lasting positive consequences that could enhance well-being. And I've been involved in mentoring David now as he's looking to develop this new program into one that can be transformative for the field and for the world. A very recent step in this direction is his work on leading a kind of mega educational initiative to provide online education far and wide to people who want to better understand psychedelics want to understand how they might provide healing for mental disorders, how they interact with spiritual insights. But he also wants to make sure that the education involves considering the risks associated with psychedelics and how the risks can be mitigated. So with David driving this new program, I am confident these ambitious goals are no mere pipe dream. With that, let me ask Dr. Yaden to come to the podium.
Thank you. I'm going to be saying those words a lot today. Thank you, President Daniels, for hosting us, Dr. DeWeese, Dr. Potash, my CPCR fellow faculty, Fred Barrett, Al Garcia-Ramo, Natalie Gukassian, Sandeep Nayak, and others. My wife, Bit, the real Dr. Yaden, Marla, and of course, Roland. It is the honor of a lifetime to receive this professorship, and I accept it with gratitude, humility, and inspiration due to the work that went into establishing it and the work that it will fund in the future. Thank you. Now, this endowment event is a little unusual. You've probably noticed. It's unusual for a few different reasons. First, despite the fact that my hair is gray and falling out in academic terms, I'm considered academically young. The responsibility of this position, rest assured, is not lost on me. It is a prodigious honor, and I will do all that I can to carry forward Roland's vision. But I've been at this for a while now. So 16 years ago, a very naive and intensely curious undergraduate wrote to Dr. Roland Griffith at Johns Hopkins University about the now historic and classic study that he conducted on psilocybin that we've heard about several times, about the experience, about the risks, and about the benefits. And this undergraduate, who was me, asked, well, what if the sample had been committed atheists or convinced religious believers of any number of religious faiths? How would that have changed the experience and the risk profile and the benefits? And Roland, being the consummate experimentalist that he is, said, I don't know, but the study should be done. 16 years later, sitting around the dinner table with Bit and Marla and Roland, we talked about running those very same studies. And Bit embarrassed me by making me take out that email written 16 years previous. I actually have it right here. Now, I'll spare mostly myself the embarrassment of reading my email, but just a sentence from Roland's response. Great question, and we don't know the answer. It would be fascinating to run these different groups through the protocol, but we don't have funding to do so at present. Well, Roland, we do now. And we do entirely due to the generous support of our donors. So could I just ask that we do a round of applause for our donors? Thank you. The Turnbulls and many others, thank you. Another unusual aspect of this event is that the namesake is not only here, but is a scientist of historic importance. So we are witnessing history. And we have the opportunity to celebrate, Roland, not only your work, your career, your person, and your vision in creating this endowment. So those are already a few unusual aspects of this endowment. And I haven't even mentioned the word psychedelic, or well-being, or spirituality, for that matter. So I want to address these concepts directly and talk a little bit about why I think they matter and why I think they're such a perfect fit with the missions of both the university and the medical school. But first, a disclaimer. So while it should be screamingly obvious to anyone who has read any of Roland's writing on this topic, or my own for this matter, nothing that we're talking about today is an endorsement of the indiscriminate use of psychedelics, nor is it an endorsement of a simplistic relationship between psychedelics and well-being, nor is it an endorsement of any one particular belief system. Just want to make sure that that's crystal clear, because I think I'll have to make that disclaimer and clarification many times to make sure that the intent of Roland's is honored. So let's take those concepts one at a time. So psychedelics, spirituality, and well-being. First, psychedelics. Psychedelics in this day and age is probably the least unusual of these concepts to talk about at a major medical school. Due to Roland's pioneering work, psychedelics and psychiatry is routinely discussed at all of the world's leading medical institutions. Now, there are risks for psychedelics, and this is indeed part and parcel of the mission of this endowment, is to focus on understanding and quantifying these risks. I think we have an ethical obligation as scientists to study the risks in unsafe and unsupportive settings, as well as the risks in safe and supportive settings. But we also need to attend to the benefit that has been empirically demonstrated now for over a decade. So the risks, the benefits, and the other fascinating subjective effects that psychedelics give rise to. So on that point, to spirituality. Now, spirituality is a word that means very different things to different people. For some, it means, well, for all, I think it means connection to something that matters most to us. For some, that means connection to another higher realm that's described in religious doctrine. For others, it means belief in an all-pervading mind of some kind that we can connect to, and it's beyond religious doctrine. For others, it means connecting to this world and other people in it, in an existentialist or naturalistic sense. So spirituality means different things to different people. But regardless of any of these beliefs or interpretations, when we study these experiences, we follow in the footsteps of physician, psychologist, and philosopher William James, who I'm delighted that we've heard some more about today. We follow in those footsteps in setting aside these unfalsifiable interpretations and beliefs, and we focus on the causes, the consequences, the correlates of what we can study scientifically. Now, in our samples at the CPCR, administering psilocybin, we see a large number of individuals in our samples reporting that these experiences are deeply meaningful and spiritually significant. We need to understand more about why that is and why that matters, and that indeed is a part of the focus of this endowment. It's a topic that's studied across the university, and I think it makes sense to study in the medical school as well. You may think, well, what does medicine have to do with spirituality? But consider the following. Where do our thoughts go as a loved one hangs in the balance between life and death? What do we feel as we welcome new life into the world and the wonder of childbirth? How do we, as we all must, face our own mortality and even find a way to accept and embrace it, as Roland is so beautifully and brilliantly modeling for myself and for all of us. So I think these things should be studied systematically, scientifically, in an unbiased manner. Third, well-being. Well-being, as I've said, poses risks to well-being. Psychedelics pose risks to well-being, certainly in unsupported and unsafe contexts. But they also seem to convey tremendous benefit in safe and supportive contexts. Now, sometimes in the medical context, wellness is conflated with well-being. Wellness is about the prevention of disease and the support of health. But well-being, I think, is about what makes life worth living. For those who have studied law or economics or politics or philosophy, you'll know that well-being is a term with centuries of history and indeed is at the core of our civil systems, of our law, and of our ethical systems. It is the reason why we get up in the morning. A little Socratic questioning will quickly reveal well-being to be among the best candidates for the source of value in human life. When you think about why you got up in the morning, it probably has a lot to do with your own well-being and that of your loved ones, your colleagues, and your fellow citizens. So I think spirituality, well-being, and psychedelics fit squarely within the mission of not only the medical school, but the university. So a little bit about how I fit into all of this. It's probably easy to imagine the well-meaning advice by many people who I interacted with in academia about how my choice of topic was career suicide. In my case, not only career suicide once over, but 3 times over. Now, I should say that skepticism is well-founded. These are topics that attract a great deal of misinformation and pseudoscience. And so we have our work cut out for us in correcting these misconceptions and non-evidence-based claims. Skepticism, when offered in the spirit of constructive critique, is a gift, and I think that thrives here at Hopkins. I also was lucky to have mentors who believed in me and in these ideas. Lyle Unger, Andy Newberg, Marty Seligman, and many others. I also was able to draw on history. The fact that some of the finest minds in history had grappled with these subjects kept me going on many days. People like Bertrand Russell and William James and others who created classic works on these topics. But most of all, I had a living, breathing example of a world-class scientist who was conducting rigorous research squarely on these subjects, Roland Griffiths. I would not be here today without you, even before we knew one another. So thank you, and on behalf of so many young scientists, thank you for persisting. So finally, a few words about Roland and the future of the endowment. So it is, again, the honor of a lifetime, truly, to replicate and extend Roland's pioneering work on this topic. I am professionally and personally in awe of Roland's capacities. He has not only produced world-class science and renewed interest worldwide on a particular topic, essentially restarted an entire field, but his mentorship has been transformational, not only in the conduct of science and in visionary ideas, but also on a personal level in how to approach life and how to even understand and face death. Roland, I am in awe of you. Thank you. So again, this research, I believe, is at the heart of the medical school's mission, as well as that of the university as a whole. And I would say in closing that with his scientific research and vision for this fund, Roland has helped remind the world, yet again, that Hopkins is not only rooted in its history, but is busy, boldly pursuing new horizons of knowledge. Thank you.
David, thank you for those really wonderful comments, and Roland, for yours too. They really do show that a real positive life is available to all of us, so thank you for that. Ladies and gentlemen, the professorships are the highest honor that we in the School of Medicine can bestow on a member of our faculty. And I guess from my lens, there's really three things that they indeed do represent. One, it's not so much, although we think about it as the past work, and indeed we try to find those folks who do have a body of work that would support what I'm about to say. It's mostly about the future work and the promise of future work. And so, David, that mantle lays heavy on you right now that you're going to get this. It's a big responsibility, and I know one that you are anxious to take on. So it's the promise of work that's going to continue to transform the field as Roland's work has. Secondly, it's to make sure we are providing the support necessary through these endowments to allow the recipients to be less encumbered in what they do, how they have to generate their salaries so they can focus their time and energies on their research. Which goes to the last point, which is we want to be sure that indeed the faculty on whom or to whom these are provided continue to bring great luster to the name of Johns Hopkins, to its School of Medicine, and that, David, being sure that you will continue to reflect much great positive light on the rest of us here. So, David, if you come up, I want to present you with this honor and the medallion from Johns Hopkins. Congratulations.
That was a wonderful talk, David. And again, I think it's clear to all of us that we picked the right guy. Thank you so much, and thanks to the family and friends and colleagues of Roland and of David for joining us today. Once again, thanks to the many hundreds of donors who've made Roland's dream a reality. It is now my pleasure to repeat President Daniel's invitation for all of us, for all of you to join us and continue our celebration at Nichols House, which is out this door and down the way. Thanks, everybody.